Alright, so that's a lot better. So I had the esteemed privilege to fly out to LA to attend the private Path of Exile 2 meetup. And I will say that the gameplay was absolutely terrifying, but also incredibly exciting. And here's why. When you go ahead and pick up Path of Exile 1, it has a fairly gentle learning curve. For the most part, you can just equip your first skill gem and just start killing everything. There's really not a whole lot of threats that are going to be able to take you down very quickly. And then, of course, once you get to, say, Act 4, Act 5, that's where things start to really pick up. And if you don't have your stuff together, there's going to be that steeper learning curve. And that's what usually catches quite a few new players out. That is absolutely not the case for Path of Exile 2. Right from the get-go, it is an absolute challenge. The general white mobs, the basic mobs, every creature has a threat to be able to kill you quickly, which is terrifying. In some of the talks that I had with the Grinding Gears team, we went ahead and discussed the difficulty scaling, and one of the very important messages that they wanted to put across immediately, as soon as you log in, as soon as your first experience is there, is that nothing is given to you. You have to work for every level. You have to fight. You have to survive. You have to engage the gameplay. Nothing here is mindless. The mobs are difficult. You have to mind your health potions. You have to watch out for all these different particle effects, because even as a warrior, someone who's supposed to be in melee, tanky, or in that sense a little bit more durable, was paper thin to some of these mobs. That is exciting. That is incredible. In this time, I played the warrior for basically the entire duration of this event because I wanted to, one, see how far I could get through the axe as the warrior, but then also see what it's like to be in melee in Path of Exile 2. Melee seems to be a bigger emphasis here in Path of Exile 2, or at least a bigger interest, we'll say. And I wanted to see if they made it any more, we'll say, engaging or easier. They didn't make it a damn thing easier. Each and every passive point that I got, I basically had to spec into some form of defensibility, either increasing armor or health regen, which is already significantly less when you compare it to, say, for example, Path of Exile 1. But just reiterating, Grinding Gears wanted it to be a standard that the second you walk into this game, it is a challenge, and it's meant to be a challenge. It's meant to be engaging. It's meant to be thoughtful gameplay rather than just mindless slashing. And I loved it. I love the idea of it because it adds that air of uncertainty. I'm curious to see how streaming will go with this because you have to pay attention so incredibly tight that if you're watching the chat and then you're playing the game, you're probably gonna die. That's incredible, honestly. You don't see that from games that often now. And that's one thing I'm just like stoked by. And even touching on some of the defensive traits that I went ahead and picked, I tried to have a bigger emphasis on regeneration. So if you didn't know, with your flasks in Path of Exile 2, you don't necessarily get them as you kill mobs. They don't regenerate in that way. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. The main way is to just go visit the town center and fill up at the well. You can also fill them up if you level. You can also fill them up if you beat a boss. You also fill them up if you kill a rare mob. That's about it. So with my thought, I said, you know what? How about I save myself some trouble and get some regen? And I did have some good health regen, but even after that, I would get smacked by a heavy hitting mob, and it would be 10 seconds, 12 seconds before I was even comfortable of going back in without having my face pushed in. That's really refreshing in my mind. I really enjoyed it. And even with that thought, you would think that the bosses, so to speak, in this game are going to be, at least the early ones are going to be fairly straightforward, a kind of a pushover. That is not the case. None of it is given. Everything is a stressful fight to the finish. It is a blood match to the very end. And I think that's what's going to be one of the best crowning features of Path of Exile 2. And kind of looking at the direction of what I feel Path of Exile 2 is going to be, it feels like it's going to be that darker, edgier, older brother to Path of Exile. Now, don't get me wrong. I was able to go through my initial playthrough of Path of Exile, kind of fudging my own build. I did a shield block Reckoning Templar build that evolved into an Infernal Blow Ignite build. And it made it through the campaign, and for my first playthrough, it was okay. It did what it needed to. But again, it fell off heavily. Now, with this, with Path of Exile 2, with the challenge already being presented within the initial levels, I felt like that by the time that you got to level 10, 15, you would have a couple of pieces of equipment. Things got smoother then versus that initial experience, which is absolutely brutal. You're going to die a bunch. Like, I'm actually really curious to see how players handle hardcore, because there's a lot of things that hit really, really hard, and I hope that they don't change it. I hope that they keep that difficulty. I hope they keep that air of uncertainty, because that adds that intriguing gameplay to me. Keep it like that. Let the couple of levels go. As you get to 10, 15, 20, and you start getting better gear, you get a big weapon that can one-shot most mobs, okay, then we start to see the power scaling, and you can see your build grow. That's great. But those first couple of levels, that first introduction is a wake-up call, and it is beautiful. And I do have to talk about even the bosses. And talking with the Grinding Gears team, they made a very big point of putting a checkpoint right as you are entering a boss room or a major fight, because they want you to challenge yourself, fight this boss that has many one-shot capabilities. Most of these bosses have like 1 to 2 full one-shots, and even for my warrior, who has, generally speaking, I would say more HP and more defense as you would imagine, in comparison to the ranger or the sorceress, has a lot more, and then is still getting like nearly killed in one hit. It's very, very unforgiving. But the boss fights are meant to allow you to die for the first 1 or 2 times to understand the fight, understand the flow of the mechanics, and then being able to dive in and out and do very, very well. And it's still so good. But given all of these difficulties, and even my experience playing the warrior, I will definitely say that Grinding Gears has given you the tools, especially jumping in as a first-time player. You are given the tools to be able to succeed, right? You're given certain things, certain elements that allow you to mitigate damage, to avoid damage completely. One of the big mechanics that they're including in Path of Exile 2 is dodge rolling. You are capable of essentially having a full second, we'll say a few frames of invulnerability where you can't be touched. Now, I did confirm that it doesn't necessarily move you faster or further than if you would have walked. It's the same speed, even though there's a lot more happening within that start point to end point. But it does offer that extra, we'll say, defensibility. If you time it right, you can dodge and negate an attack completely. Now, it also doesn't seem to really have any effect to any aerial attacks or even any ground area attacks. So unless it was a direct attack at you that you dodged completely, then yeah, it seems like you're still going to get hit. And then also paired with that, with the warrior, what they introduced, which is so exciting, is shield block. Now, we have shield block in Path of Exile, right? And again, I speak purely from that. I love the shield block. I had it at 75% max. We were good to go. With Path of Exile 2, you're going to have a shield. When you equipped it, you get a skill called shield block. And as you are channeling this, it's usually to your right mouse click, you can deflect and fully become invulnerable from that direction, front-facing direction, as long as you have that shield up. Now, again, there is a little bit of a caveat. As you block attacks, you have an endurance bar, and once it fills up, you can no longer shield block. So basically, it's a mini shell. Think of it kind of like, in a sense, the Super Smash Bros. Shield, where you can block a couple of attacks and you can do that, but the more that you sit into it and it gets attacked, the smaller it goes until you can't use it. Very similar to that manner. And what's even more interesting about that is that it blocks spells too. Doesn't do anything with aerial attacks, doesn't do anything with ground attacks, so those types are still going to be an issue. Also, with specific mobs and bosses, as they are going through their attacks, they will flash a red warning sign. It'll be very quick, very brief, but you will see an attack that you cannot block, and you have to either move out of the way or do something else to avoid the attack. So you can't just always sit in the shield block and expect to essentially play God. There is a limit. There's a very hard limit of what you're capable of doing. But essentially, you were given all the tools that you need to be able to challenge these more difficult bosses and essentially do the best that you can with these to beat them down. Now, I make the comparison, and I confirmed with the Grinding Gears team that there is a lot of inspiration drawn from Elden Ring. Now with Elden Ring, you have obviously your dodge rolls, you have your endurance, you're trying to sneak in a couple of attacks and avoid a lot of heavy hitting attacks. It is very much that bob and weave kind of thing. You really have to get in there, do a couple of attacks, and then pull out. Now, that is absolutely exciting because it takes that element of, I'm just going to be able to steamroll every boss that I come in front of because there's nothing that they can do. And at least my experience with the warrior. Now, I heard that the ranger was very, very powerful in this testing, and so was the sorceress to some degree. Many creators who were at this event said that the warrior was just, it was brutal. And I can agree with it. I had a lot of stubborn anger to be put towards that. But you have this capability of a almost dance that you can pull, especially with the warrior, with your dodging, with your shield block, getting in your attacks and pulling out when you need to. That is what is exciting to me, is that there isn't anything given. You have to earn it. Now, the last thing I will touch on, and why I think Path of Exile 2 is absolutely brutal, it's exciting, but it's brutal, is the loot. Now, I personally didn't have a whole lot of luck with loot. Most of my playtesting, I actually only had a white two-handed mace. That's all I could find that was worth any type of damage. Now, again, that made the boss fights last incredibly long, as well as me being able to die very quickly because I don't have my shield. Now, the alternative was a shield with a wooden club, but I didn't even have a good wooden club, so I'm just going to be essentially wet noodling things to death. And I had to find the most efficient way. Now, I had also heard that there were some players who got some really, really good loot, and they were able to cruise nearly to like level 30 or something like that. They crushed it within this time frame. But I will say that I hope that they keep the loot very low like that, where there isn't necessarily a flood of gear thrown at you as they move through, because it makes each piece of gear that you get that much more engaging, that much more interesting, we'll say, for that development, for your character's growth. So you have these little elements as you're moving forward, and you're getting a little bit stronger, and you're getting a little bit further down the road. You're getting that one piece of gear that, you know, adds an extra 10% defense or extra life regeneration. You know, something that's going to move your character and make it a little bit more durable. I like those small incremental changes. I do, because that still keeps the intensity, it still keeps the difficulty, but also allows you to progress, and it gives you that satisfaction. Absolutely, I love it. It was fantastic. It was a lot of struggle, it was a lot of anger, a lot of coffee, but it was a hell of a good time. This game is looking so good this early, and I am excited. Now, I did kind of outline my 5 favorite points from Path of Exile 2, my playtesting during that time that we were given, and you can find that video linked here. As always, stay caffeinated, Exiles.